welcome back to my channel. It is your girl, Dutchy. And welcome to my first episode of Everything You Didn't Learn in Sex Ed. Today's topic of conversation will be all about consent. However, in future, you can look forward to episodes on foreplay, masturbation, the different ways of having sex, including queer sex, not just penis in vagina, different positions, techniques, protection, what qualifies as sex, and so much more. So if you're just as excited as I am for this new series, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so that you don't miss an episode. And without further ado, let's get into it, shall we? Okay. Consent. I wanted to start this series off with the most important function of any sexual relationship or encounter. So, Dutchy, what is sexual consent? Well, fam, I'm so glad you asked. Sexual consent is when you and your sexual partner are both actively willing to engage in a particular sexual behavior, where both parties express their consent explicitly by either saying yes or showing them. It is also super important to note that just because someone consents to one type of sexual behavior does not mean that they have agreed to engage in another. For example, if you and your sexual partner decide to have consensual vaginal sex, i.e. with a penis or strap-on, etc., this does not necessarily mean that they would be willing to have anal sex. And as I will be covering throughout this series, there are many different ways to have sex, and each of these ways require consent. Every single one of them. It is of utmost importance to be clear on consent before things get too hot and heavy. This particular video will help you if you're wanting a deeper understanding of what sexual consent is, if you're thinking about whether you're ready for sex or not, if you want to know how to give or ask for consent, if you want to know how to slow things down or stop sex, and some examples of positive consent and some examples that are not consensual at all. And I'm sure you are all aware, but I would just like to disclaim that I am not a sexual health expert. I am not a sexpert. I do not have a degree or anything in this field. I will just be speaking from personal experience with a lot of these things and also researching the topics thoroughly before I do present any information to you. So keep in mind that anything that I put forward in these videos has been researched. But again, take everything I say with a grain of salt because I'm not an expert in these fields. I've just done some research on them. Gotcha. So can anyone have sex, or like is there an age limit or age of consent? If you didn't already know, there are laws surrounding consent, in particular age. Age of consent laws are designed to protect children and young people from sexual exploitation and abuse. These laws determine that children and young people below the age of consent are yet to reach a level of general maturity which would enable their safe participation in sexual activities. In layman's terms, this basically just means they've set an age, and for anyone below that age, they do not believe have reached a maturity level that allows you to make a decision on whether you are ready to have sex or not. In most states in Australia, the legal age is 16. However, in Tasmania and South Australia, it is 17, I believe. Whereas in America, I just did a quick Google here and it says the age at which there are no restrictions for consensual sexual activities is 18. So there you go. In America, it's 18. In Australia, it's 16 or 17. And I'm sure different rules and ages apply throughout the world. So if you're unsure of your legal age of consent in your country or wherever you live, then a quick Google search can help you out with that one. Okay, so now let's dive a little bit deeper into sexual consent and what it entails, what it should look like, and some examples of it. First things first, sexual consent must be explicit. And I cannot stress this enough. There is only one way to know if someone is giving their consent, and that is if they tell you so. We can never and should never assume that one person is into us as much as we are into them, despite what some of their actions may show. And it is extremely important to check because any non-consensual sexual activity is harmful and illegal. My second point surrounding the concept of consent is you are always allowed to change your mind. You or your sexual partner can decide at any time that you don't want to keep going, even if you've already started having sex. And when this happens, both parties should stop immediately. Which leads in perfectly to my next point. It is completely fine to slow things down or stop. There is absolutely no rush to have sex if you're not feeling it. If things are moving along too quickly for you, here are a few examples of things that you can say in this situation. Can we slow down? Can we take a break? Can we stop? It's also a good idea and super healthy to check in with each other. Be aware of your sexual partner's body language. If they seem uncomfortable or tense or stressed about something, pause for a moment and ask if they're all right. Ask if they're doing okay. In saying this, it's also important that you don't rely on your sexual partner to pick up on these cues or see it, because if they're super into it, they may not pay attention to your body language. So if something isn't feeling right, or you want to slow down or take a break or stop completely, you need to tell them. And lastly, alcohol and drugs affect consent. If you're extremely drunk or high, you are not able to give valid consent. Yeah, okay, all great points. So what does positive consent look like? Well, positive consent can look like a few different things, such as communicating when you change the type or degree of sexual activity with phrases like, "Is this okay?" or "Are you comfortable?" Positive consent also looks like explicitly agreeing to certain activities, either by saying yes or affirmative statements such as, "I'm willing to try," or "Yeah, I'd like to try that." Some people also use physical cues to let the other person know that you're comfortable with taking things to the next level. For example, if you've been making out with someone for a while and then they hop on top of you and start to take control or something like that. However, this can create a bit of a grey area depending on who you are doing this with, because then you don't know if they want to go to the next level or not, which is why verbal cues are the most explicit form of consent and should be encouraged, especially in new sort of relationships or new sexual encounters. I see. And what does consent not look like? Okay, and now for this segment, I would just like to place a quick trigger warning here. I'm just going to be talking about what consent doesn't look like. Nothing too explicit at all, but I will be mentioning sexual assault at the end and talking about things related to that. So if talk of that is triggering to you in some way, then please skip to this timestamp. That's when I will have finished talking about what isn't consent. So consent does not look like refusing to acknowledge no, assuming that wearing certain clothes, flirting or kissing is an invitation for anything more, someone being under age of legal consent, pressuring or coercing someone into sexual activities, or assuming you have permission to engage in a sexual activity just because you've done it in the past. Operative word in many of those points being assume. We can never assume, and it's always best to receive explicit consent from anyone that you are participating in sexual activities with. Always, always, always. It doesn't matter if they are kissing you and making out with you. They may not want to go to the next level. They may not want to tell you that because they may be scared. They may have many insecurities about things. It is always, always, always important to show that you're concerned and ask for that consent. There are so many different ways to ask for consent. I'll just list them on the screen here just briefly, but it is so important in every single sexual encounter, in every situation. Consent is queen and consent is sexy. However, in this type of video, I also think it's important to acknowledge that if you have experienced a form of sexual assault, it's not your fault and you are not alone. Unfortunately, I'm not trained in this area to help you. So if you are looking for someone who is trained to help, you need someone to talk to and you don't want to talk to a family member or friend, please, please, please call the National Sexual Assault Hotline on 800-565-4673. I'll pop that on the screen for you as well. And while I know that's pretty dark to talk about, it just happens far too often. And there are many different forms of sexual assault too, and I feel like it's not spoken about enough for obvious reasons. It is a really difficult thing to speak about, and it's an even more difficult thing to experience and then speak about later. But I just thought while we were on the topic of consent, it would be ignorant of me to not bring up and to not provide you guys with a hotline and a form of contact if you do need to speak to someone. So that's about all I have for you guys today on the topic of consent. If you have any questions or would like to contribute, please don't hesitate to comment. Let's have a conversation. I'm happy to answer any of your questions about this episode and have a chat. Also, don't hesitate to suggest some other sex education topics that you would like me to cover next. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you did enjoy them, please make sure to give this video a huge thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel, hit that notification bell, and I will see you guys in my next one. Bye!